There was a certain atmosphere in May of 2006 in Germany. It was early summer, and everyone was eagerly awaiting the start of the Football World Cup that was hosted in Germany that year. Later, the German press would title this time a summer fairy tale. Nowhere could this anticipation be felt more than in Munich, a town in the south of Germany, where the first game would be held. That was until this fairy tale turned into a nightmare. Let's talk about it. Charlotte Böhringer was 59 years old, and she had achieved a lot in her life. She owned a big portfolio of properties, including a big parking garage in the middle of Munich. She was a self-made millionaire, but that could not save her from what happened on May the 15th, in the early evening. She was brutally attacked in her penthouse atop the before-mentioned parking garage. The coroner later stated that she died from a massive hit to the head. The hit had been dealt with such force that it actually paralyzed her central nervous system. The police, of course, were working overtime on the case. Charlotte was not only part of the elite of Munich, she also had a lot of friends in high places. Even the mayor put pressure on the police. He wanted the case solved before the first game of the World Cup started. After all, no one wanted to have a killer on the loose when the town was in the world's spotlight. And it only took them a few days to name their one and only suspect. Charlotte's own nephew, Benedict, who was 31 at the time. They also immediately named his motive: money. Charlotte had no children of her own, and Benedict had been one of the benefactors of her will. But Benedict was professing his innocence. He denied having anything to do with the murder of his aunt. It took 2 years for the case to go in front of a judge. On May the 2nd in 2007, Benedict didn't hide his face, and even after 2 years in prison, he still swore his innocence. Unfortunately, he had two problems. The first one being that he had no alibi for the night she died. He claimed he had been home sick in bed. The second problem was that the prosecution claimed he was the only one with a motive. He was supposed to inherit the parking garage, but only if he finished his law degree. But he had dropped out of university, and as he himself claimed, he had been too cowardly to admit that to his aunt. Now, the other side also had problems. The prosecution had no evidence other than circumstances. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints of Benedict's were found in the penthouse, and they couldn't even find the murder weapon. All they had was the coroner, who guessed that she was killed with a small hammer. Even the course of events of that night was little more than a guessing game. But the defense did have an argument against Benedict being the guilty party. Benedict was left-handed, but the coroner is absolutely sure that Charlotte was killed by someone right-handed. In fact, the wound on her head was so severe that the blow must have been dealt with a dominant hand. So even if Benedict was some kind of criminal mastermind, he would have had to train his right hand for months to do the deed. But the prosecution waved that explanation away, claiming that he was able to use the gearshift in his car with his right hand. So it was clearly trained. Even back then, the press was not impressed with the police and prosecution's work. And even a lot of the public didn't think he was guilty. In fact, most people saw him as a scapegoat, because the police was pressured to produce the criminal because of the World Cup. Even his lawyer lost his temper when he talked to the press, telling them that the police never even looked at other suspects. A perfect example of this is a glass that was found in Charlotte's dishwasher. It had DNA on it that neither belonged to Charlotte nor Benedict, but the DNA was found at another murder case. But somehow, neither the police nor the judge nor the prosecution cared about that. And they actually found him guilty on the 12th of August 2008, purely on circumstances. The earliest he could be released was 2028, but his lawyer, his family, and his friends never gave up on proving his innocence. His family even gathered €250,000 as a reward if anyone could bring forth the real killer. His lawyer tried twice to get the case reopened, once in 2012 and once more in 2019, but he got denied both times. Benedict was supposed to inherit the parking garage in Charlotte's will. But because he got charged with her murder, the money and the property would now go not to the next family member, but to the state. Thankfully, his brother stepped in and had him declared unfit to inherit, and this led to the case going to a civil court. And let's just say the judges were not impressed with the original judge, the prosecutor, or the police. And new evidence turned up. As it turned out, Charlotte knew that her nephew had dropped out of college, but she still wanted to keep it in her will. So the motive the police alleged was gone. But even though the broad public and civil court agreed that there was not even close to enough evidence of his involvement, the criminal court just ignored all of that and denied him a retrial. But then, after 6,186 days in prison, Benedict got released, on order of the Penal Enforcement Chamber. They found that there was not enough evidence to keep him locked up. Unfortunately, he is to this day still considered a murderer, even though there's plenty of evidence that he didn't kill his aunt. It also turned out that the police lied when they claimed there were no other suspects. There was an investment banker that embezzled a big chunk of Charlotte's fortune, and she threatened that she would go to the police. But it actually even gets worse. Charlotte was supposed to meet a friend that night at her apartment. This friend had claimed that he just didn't show up that night, and that he had went to the sauna. But the police never confirmed that alibi, and even worse, there were apparently witnesses that had seen that man the night of the murder at the parking garage. All in all, I think it's fair to say that Benedict is probably the most unlikely of the suspects, and him and his family and his lawyer, who had stayed loyal to him for all those years, are still fighting for justice. And they are also fighting to find the real killer. So what do you think? I think it's absolutely crazy that the police just went for Benedict when this mysterious friend clearly lied about not being there. And let's also not forget the DNA in the dishwasher that was found at another crime scene.